It's no secret that most people never really learn how to design effective presentation slides. Rather, they're just given a computer with PowerPoint and told, go at it. And so it's no surprise that most PowerPoint presentations really suck. In this video, I'm going to provide you with a quick overview of some basic principles of slide design. Implement these in your own presentation slides, and I guarantee you your presentations will look better and be more effective. The first principle that I want to talk about is that of contrast. Remember, the ultimate purpose of any presentation is to communicate clearly with your audience. And if they can't read the text on your slides, you're really falling short right out of the gate. So principle number one, high contrast, means that you need to make sure that your background and your text color are different enough that they can be easily read. You can see here on the slide that dark text on a dark background and light text on a light background is very difficult to read. Just plain black text on a white background provides you with the best contrast. And dark text on a light background also tends to maintain visual intensity better than even light text on a dark background. But whatever color scheme you choose, make sure that you have really high contrast between your text and your background. One thing to note, the contrast capabilities of computer screens are much higher than most computer projectors. So even if a dark text on a dark background or light text on a light background looks really readable on your computer screen, it will not be readable in most cases when projected. So when in doubt, make the contrast higher. You want your audience to focus all their attention on what you're saying and what you're presenting, not to be squinting trying to figure out what your text actually says on the slide. When you're using text, one thing that can make it even easier to read is the use of the text shadow tool. This can, particularly at larger sizes, make your text easier to read. Now for font sizes below about 28, you probably want to avoid using text shadow altogether, and certainly for anything below 24. But for large text, the kind that you'd put in the headline of your slide, sometimes using the text shadow tool can give it just a little bit of extra crispness when projected. One thing that beginning PowerPoint slide designers often do that is a huge mistake is using the built-in PowerPoint themes. Now, some of the PowerPoint themes that are built in are great. They're very simple and professional looking. But there are many, like the ones you see on the screen over here, that are just terrible. They have text that's not horizontally oriented. They have weird and distracting graphics in the background. Some of them don't even have good enough contrast to be easily read. So use your best judgment. If it's not something that you think would be at home in a boardroom or other professional environment, you probably should avoid using that type of theme altogether in any situation where you might be using PowerPoint. Related to fonts again, there are two basic categories of fonts that you can use in a PowerPoint presentation: serif fonts and sans serif fonts. If you look over here, serifs are those little decorative flourishes that you can see at the ends and edges of the letters on the top fonts. The bottom font, the sans serif fonts, meaning without serifs, lack those additional decorative strokes. In general, sans serif fonts are easier to read, particularly when projected. And so if you're going to have slides that have a lot of text on them, and in general you should not have slides with a lot of text on them, the sans serif font is the safest choice. You also want to make sure that you use your fonts consistently throughout the presentation. One of the biggest mistakes that people can make is using lots of different fonts throughout the presentation, sometimes even on the same slide. So for example, this one about "Does love make us think more creatively?" has 5 different fonts on a single slide. Certainly that's creative, to a third grader, but it really violates the expectation of consistency. As a general principle, you should stick with no more than 2 fonts throughout an entire presentation. Typically what I see is 1 font used in the headline and 1 font used in the body of slides. That gives you a little bit of separation, a little bit of contrast between your headlines and body text, but it doesn't overwhelm the audience with all of the different fonts that you're using throughout the presentation. Now this should go without saying, but it is absolutely inappropriate in 99% of cases to ever use a script or decorative font in your presentation. They're simply too hard to read. And any time that your audience is spending a lot of time thinking about what your text actually says, rather than thinking about what your text actually says, you are reducing your audience's cognitive energy that they can devote to processing the important messages that you are delivering in your presentation. So avoid scripts and complex fonts, anything that's difficult to read. Throughout your presentation, one of the key principles that should guide your design is the principle of consistency. There are all kinds of little inconsistencies, and although some people in your audience will never notice them, there are many who will, and they will find them distracting. And they will spend time thinking about the inconsistencies in your slide rather than thinking about the important information that you are trying to convey to them. So your hidden assignment for this unit is to look at each of the slides that I'm about to show you and email me with a description of the inconsistency that you noticed on each slide. So here's the first one. What is the mistake or inconsistency on this slide that might be distracting to some people in your audience? Let's move on to the next example. And I'll tell you right from the beginning, don't worry about the icon in the bottom right not being readable. That's not the mistake or inconsistency. And in the larger scheme of this particular presentation, it made perfect sense to have that unreadable guiding icon in the bottom. So look at the text and identify the inconsistency or mistake on this particular slide. Next, what is it about this slide that is inconsistent or a mistake that should be fixed? One more. Take a look at this slide. I like this slide. It's been organized using the assertion evidence structure, which is good, but there is also an inconsistency that could provide distraction for the audience. Once you've identified the inconsistencies in these 4 slides, email them to me. That's the hidden assignment for extra credit in this unit. One thing that you can do in your presentations to draw attention to important terminology or key ideas is to use font formatting like colored, bold, or italicized text to highlight important concepts or ideas. On this example slide, you can see that the key vocabulary term, twin paradox, is highlighted in yellow to draw the audience's attention to that concept as central to what the presenter is trying to communicate. It should go without saying, but making sure that your slides are absolutely free of any punctuation, grammar, and spelling errors is absolutely essential. Now, maybe you're a person who just isn't very good at punctuation and spelling or grammar. You just can't proofread very well. If you are one of those people, then you need to take the time to find someone else who is good at punctuation, grammar, and spelling to take a look at your slides before you step in front of an audience. Nothing will destroy your credibility as a speaker more quickly or more completely as having stupid mistakes on your PowerPoint slides. The audience will be forced to conclude that either you're an idiot or you simply didn't care enough about the presentation to proofread your slides. So proofread your slides. One of the great things about the internet is that it has provided presenters with a virtually unlimited possibilities in terms of finding really high quality images that can be used in your presentations. And because it's so easy to find good images, it's important that you make sure that your images are of suitable quality to convey the sense of professionalism and expertise that you want to convey as a presenter. When you do use graphics in your presentations, though, it's important that you remember one key rule. Never, 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 never stretch images. When you stretch images even a little bit, it provides a fuzziness to the image that makes it look like you just didn't really care a whole lot about the presentation. Consider this Taco Bell logo. Now what you see here is the original size. This is that same image stretched to 150%. Here it is at 200%, 250%, 300%, 350%. You can see as it gets bigger and bigger, it gets grainier and grainier. So here's the guiding principle when using images in PowerPoint. If you have to stretch the image at all, it is not high enough resolution for you to use in your presentation. Find a higher resolution image that can fulfill the function of the image in your presentation. You can see the difference between the image on the left and the image on the right is really quite stark in terms of the overall professional look and feel of the presentation. The second guideline when using images is that you should never manipulate the aspect ratio, particularly of photographs. What I mean by manipulating the aspect ratio is shrinking the image. Remember, we're never going to stretch it, but if you shrink an image to be smaller on your screen and you shrink the vertical or horizontal dimension in a different proportion to the opposite dimension. So you can see here, short, fat Ryan Seacrest has had his vertical dimension reduced more than his horizontal dimension. Ryan Seacrest in the middle is proportioned appropriately, and on the right, Ryan Seacrest on the side has had his horizontal dimension shrunk more than his vertical dimension, and so he looks tall and skinny. The human eye is really capable of detecting even small changes in aspect ratio. So don't ever stretch images just so they fill the area that you want them to fill on your screen. So whenever you shrink your images, use your mouse and grab the corner of the image to shrink it down. If you grab from one of the sides or the top or bottom, you're going to end up changing the aspect ratio, which produces those weird squished or stretched images. Now, because the internet makes it so easy to find high quality images, there are a lot of ways that you might end up finding what's called stock photography. These are images that have been produced by artists and photographers and that they sell in order to make a living. Typically, to protect the intellectual property of the artists who produced the work, these images have a watermark on them, and unless you pay for the image, you will not get a watermark-free version. But that way, if you're looking for a picture of something in particular, you can look through a stock photography directory, find an image, see if it's exactly what you want, and if it is, then you pay for a version without the watermark. It is a huge faux pas to use the watermarked images in your presentations. Not only are you violating copyright law, but it makes you look like a real cheapskate. You weren't willing to pay for the image, nor were you willing to go out and find a royalty-free image that you could use instead. Bad, bad idea. So never use images that have watermarks in them. The next thing that you should know is that when you do use images, particularly those that you aren't able to establish whether they are royalty-free or not, it's important that you cite the images appropriately. Now, with Google Images in particular, it's very easy at times to cite the wrong source. So for example, let's say we're looking for a picture of a Whopper on Google image search. Maybe we find this one and this looks really good and we want to place it on a PowerPoint slide. The thing that we absolutely must look for is for the actual source of the image. It's never, ever, ever okay to say image courtesy of google.com or photo credit google.com. Why? Because Google doesn't produce any of the content that they index. All they are is a search engine. That would be like saying this information came from the library. That's not very helpful. You need to make sure when you use Google Image or any other image search engine that you're appropriately crediting the actual site that hosted the image, not simply the search engine. One thing that you should know a little bit about as you start using images in your PowerPoint presentations is Creative Commons. Creative Commons arose as an alternative to traditional copyright for a digital age. Many artists and producers of digital work wanted the flexibility to specify how their digital art may be used. Unlike copyright, which essentially says all rights are reserved, and if you use this copyrighted material, we can sue you, Creative Commons instead says some rights are reserved. And based on the symbols that are next to the Creative Commons license, you can tell exactly how any given work may be used with the artist's permission. So there are a few tags that you should understand. The first is attribution, noted by a little person with a circle around it. If you see the attribution tag on a Creative Commons licensed work, that means that the owner of that creative work wants you, if you use their work in something that you are creating, to simply attribute them as the source of the original image. So if you take a picture from Flickr that's got a Creative Commons attribution license, you need to, in your PowerPoint presentation, provide a photo credit or an image credit to the author of that particular piece. The second is non-commercial. Some artists want their work to be used freely by others, but they don't want others profiting off of it. And so if you see a non-commercial tag, that means you can use that work, but you may not use it for commercial purposes. Anything that would lead to a financial gain for you as the user. The third is no derivatives. The no derivatives tag means that you can use the work as it exists, but you can't manipulate it. So for example, you could use a photograph in your PowerPoint presentation, but you couldn't paste your head on the model's body in that photograph. That would be a derivative work, which would be excluded from this particular Creative Commons license. And the fourth that you should understand is share alike. What this essentially means is the author is directing anyone who wants to use their work, you can use my work, but anything that you create using my work, you need to also share with the same Creative Commons license as I released my work under. So I know that's a lot to take in. If you want to learn a little bit more about Creative Commons, there are tons of places on the internet where you can learn about them. But one of the great things about it is that lots of photo sharing sites are now set up so that you can exclusively search Creative Commons images. So for example, Flickr.com on the advanced image search gives you the option to only search through Creative Commons licensed images. That means that you can use those images as you see fit, providing you follow the guidelines that the author has provided. Typically, attribution is the most common one. So if you use an artist's photograph from Flickr, all you need to do is provide a photo credit to that artist in your PowerPoint slide. Make sure that when you use those Creative Commons images, that you cite them with the username and the source website. That's typically the easiest way to provide an interested party with a way to find the source of the original image. So you can see this particular image of a Whopper has a photo credit to JOO0EY on Flickr. And it's important that you use usernames, not real names. There might be a million Joey Smiths on Flickr, but there's only one with the username JOO0EY. So make sure that you link to usernames. That goes for all of the major photo sharing sites that might have Creative Commons licensed images. When you use images on a slide, it's also important that you make sure you use a reasonable amount of images. It's never a good idea to just cover a slide indiscriminately with pictures, particularly when they're layered on top of each other and things like that. It just creates a very cluttered and busy slide. I like to say that this slide is really forked up. So avoid that type of layout for your slides. And finally, this rule is unbreakable. Never, 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 never use animated graphics in your presentations. Animations are fine, but animated graphics will drive your audience insane. So please avoid using them. They were great for third grade presentations when you're talking about a book report, but for professional presentations, they should absolutely be avoided. Well, this concludes a basic introduction to PowerPoint slide design principles. I hope you now have a better understanding of some key things that you can do to improve the visual look of your PowerPoint presentations.